Yes, your audio is fine.
Yeah, one second. I do have this mic. I don't know if it helps or not.
Hang on. You ready? Okay. You have a microphone. We can't hear you now.
You can.
Not clear. Just now was clear. Can you do testing 1, 2, 3? You're on mute.
Okay.
Yes.
Yeah.
Now can
Testing
you?
1, 2, 3.
Testing 1, 2, 3. Countdown 10, 9, 8.
Testing 1, 2, 3.
Okay. Now better. Can you put your mic slightly higher, perhaps? Okay. Now it's clear.
Okay. All right.
All right, that's good. All right, anytime. We'll be starting shortly.
Okay.
You'll be in backstage at this point of time, Mr. Jai, and then I'll bring you in and introduce you, yeah?
Okay.
Hello and welcome to The Nation. You're joining me, Elaine Noor Abdullah, as I come to you live from my home studio. And today I'll be discussing the topic of MATRADE on sustainability. MATRADE, or Malaysia's Trade Promotion Organisation, or MATRADE External Trade Development Corporation, is taking the leadership role to boost Malaysian exporters in the small and medium enterprises and mid-tier companies' readiness in adopting sustainability values in their export businesses. Now, this move is of course very necessary as more and more markets around the world are demanding for products and services that pay attention to societal well-being. MATRADE is anticipating this sentiment to have an influence on international trade. And joining me today from MATRADE is Mr. Jai Shankar. He is the Director of Oil and Gas, Chemical and Energy Section for MATRADE. Mr. Jai, hello and welcome. Let's delve straight into this topic of conversation we're talking about today, environmental, social and governance. So the first question I have for you, Mr. Jai, is why is ESG, or environmental, social and governance compliance, relevant to Malaysia, Mr. Jai?
Thank you, Elaine. First and foremost, thank you for the invite and thank you for getting MATRADE on board for us to share on our take on the ESG. Maybe a bit of a quick definition. ESG is to companies are what SDGs are to countries. Basically, it's these very broad-based aspirational targets, focusing on the 5 Ps, right? The people, the partnerships, the peace, planet, and so on, right? And when SDG was sort of came forth in 2015 by United Nations, when they introduced it, a lot of countries were given a roadmap in which they could go out there and look at balancing economic growth with, as you mentioned, societal and environmental prosperity, right? So there's a balance to be done. And Malaysia very quickly did that, mindful of their expectation. And in RMK 11, we started it off. And as you know, the just launched RMK 12 had a very pronounced aspect of sustainability in it. And sustainability and ESG compliance go hand in hand. And whether we are able to achieve these targets is also very much dependent on the private sector. So if you notice that our private sector has also put up a fair bit of targets, very similar with the country. Malaysia has basically said we'll go carbon neutral by 2050, and companies such as Petronas and KDWSP, TNP, and all that have also done so. And similarly, MATRADE has also looked at it and also started embedding a lot of ESG sort of components into our programs and projects, initiatives, and policies, largely because we do see the importance above and beyond the impact on social economy is also impact on trade. We feel that without compliance to ESG, Malaysian companies or exporters will lose their competitiveness in the long run.
Now, how can compliance to ESG influence trade? Perhaps we can give us a broad overview of that.
Well, the thing is this, if you sort of start talking to global consumers, importers, buyers, investors, regulators, every one of them are pushing for companies to be ESG compliant. MATRADE has 46 global offices worldwide. These offices, above and beyond being a platform for us to do export promotion, they're also a conduit for us to pick up market intel. And the feedback from all our offices are loud and clear. This trend is here to stay, and the trend is real. So essentially what needs to be done is that we need to make sure that the Malaysian exporters are able to respond to the requests by all these stakeholders towards ESG compliance. Mind you, in the past, this is not something new per se, right? But in the past, this sort of pressure, so to speak, came from the likes of NGOs. Whereas today, this sort of request and push is coming from the parties, the stakeholders who are actually making the buying decisions, right? So it's real, and we need to respond to it.
Right.
Yeah.
And these are quite lofty goals that you just mentioned. You know, by 2050 we're going to go carbon neutral. A lot of work needs to go into making these ambitions happen. Now, let's talk about the private sector. What are the challenges faced by the private sector in terms of adopting these ESG practices? How easy or difficult is it?
Okay, so you're absolutely right? So we can always go about and saying a lot of lofty stuff. So the guides for 2050 and so on, those are on a country level. Company level, clearly companies are struggling. I think the basic premise is this: for the companies, they are looking at survivability, and for them, sustainability could just be something that is maybe they're not ready for at this point of time, right? Mm-hmm. So their premise is, look, it is sustainability versus survivability, right? Where else, what we are basically saying is that no, it's not the case. It is basically sustainability will ensure survivability in the long run. So you got to do the right stuff, right? So that's I suppose differences in the way we're looking at it. But having said that, kudos to a lot of larger Malaysian companies, listed boys, many of them with the support from institutional agencies such as Security Commission, Bursa, and so on. They've started moving, right? So the needle has started moving. The larger boys are doing it, but 98% of our businesses are SMEs, and for the needle to truly move, we need these SMEs to take the bite, right? So, and that is where I think MATRADE's role will be.
Yes, I think what you have said is absolutely crucial for people to understand. The requirement to reframe what is survivability versus sustainability is no longer a choice, it's no longer an option. If you do not take that sustainability route, your survivability will be at risk. So how do people then sort of pivot and navigate in this really difficult situation? How do they sort of like make that transition? Are there any tips or ways or guide to get there, Jai?
I think first and foremost, they got to believe in it. And this is not something very philosophical, right? There's a lot of large Malaysian companies, for example, who perhaps don't have a global worldview, right? So you can be large within Malaysia, but you're not global if you don't start looking at it from a global perspective. And that does not only is limited to larger companies, right? So even SMEs today, the moment you're an exporter, you got to have a global worldview, right? So once you have the global worldview, then you sort of have to take cognizance of the trends that's happening around you, right? And the trend is whether we're comfortable with it or not, it's happening. The big buying houses, they are under pressure. They have their own set of pressures, right? So they are also trying to sort of conform to ESG. The financiers are doing it, and a whole bunch of stakeholders in the ecosystems are doing it. So what we got to do is that there has to be, I think, ultimately a culture of to sort of take it on board and embed this into your strategic intent. Because if you don't do it on a strategic path, if you do it on a very operational level, it's not going to really make an impact in the long run, right? And for you to do that, you got to start off, I suppose, as you mentioned, right? You got to reframe the whole conversation and start looking at it not from a cost perspective, but from an investment perspective.
Absolutely. We'll take a short breather right now. When we come back, we'll talk a little bit more about some of the steps that MATRADE has taken to support exporters. We'll be right back after these messages. Stay tuned. Okay, Mr. Jai will be coming back in with the next 8 minutes. There'll be 3 more questions. Then I'll take another short break, yeah? Countdown for me, Ika. Hello, and thanks for staying with us on The Nation. You're still with me, Elaine Noor Abdullah, and I'm speaking to Mr. Jai Shankar. He is, of course, the Director of Oil and Gas, Chemical and Energy Section for MATRADE, and we're speaking about the topic of sustainability as a whole, but in particular, environmental, social, and governance in export business. Mr. Jai, welcome back. We earlier spoke about the necessity to reframe our minds with regards to sustainability versus survivability, and it's no longer a choice. So let's talk about what are some of the steps that MATRADE has taken to support exporters in terms of addressing these challenges, to adopt these new methodologies.
Well, thank you, Elaine. So one of the things that we realized early on is that there is lack of information, right? And I think market intel is very, very critical. Market intel can be in relations to the demand matrix that would probably create opportunities for the companies. It could also be some of the information related to how do you go about getting your ESG certification and a whole bunch of different things. So back in 2019, we launched something called the Sustainability Action Values for Exporters program, which was basically a capacity building program to build Malaysian exporters in terms of the information, in terms of their approach and culture, so that they are actually ready for it. And we have been very mindful of this, and we have incorporated this aspect in most of our programs that we have launched since then. For example, the National Export Day, the overriding theme during that point, which is basically an event that brings across close to about 1,000 exporters, is about sustainability. Similarly, at this point in time, we have MIHAS, the virtual MIHAS trade fair that's going on. MIHAS is the largest trade fair for halal in the world. It's happening until 31st December. And we are talking about sustainability. And you might not, in usual terms, think about halal and sustainability. But if you take a step back and if you realize there is a lot of synergy between both these approach, right? They are basically about protecting consumers. It's about protecting community and so on. So we're also looking at those aspects, right? So these are some of the things that we have done. We have also started looking at supporting our exporters who are participating as exhibitors for our international event. For example, in 2019, when we participated in K Fair, the whole pavilion, we had a national pavilion with Malaysian companies. Every one of them had some aspects of ESG embedded in either an organizational level or process or product level, right? So we were trying to basically position Malaysia as a producer of ESG, or producers with ESG compliance. Right, so there's a whole bunch of different things that we're doing in terms of capacity building, in terms of brand positioning for exporters, and ultimately the idea is to put up Malaysia as a thought leader in that space.
And does MATRADE address these issues on a sectoral level? Perhaps you can advise us.
True. That's a good question, right? Because when we talk about ESG, sometimes it's way too broad-based. In fact, these different aspects of ESG resonates differently with different stakeholders within different sectors. Yeah. So if we talk about in plantation, maybe it's about forced labor. Maybe in the oil and gas, you're looking at governance and so on and so forth, right? So we are looking at it on a very sectoral level. In fact, moving forward, we are preparing to organize a series of webinars that are very sector-based that will touch on the specific issues related to ESG on those sectors. We're looking at plantations sector, we're looking at F&B, we're looking at oil and gas, we're looking at services, and so on. And similarly for this, we are not doing it all alone. We are working with a lot of different partners out there because, as you know, this sustainability and ESG is something that is close at heart with a lot of different partners across the industry. So we have a relationship and a collaboration with the likes of CIMB, with Standard Chartered, with the Turnkey Group, with UNDP, and a host of other institutions that we feel that is also sort of promoting the agenda together with us. So there's a lot of work that is being done.
Now, what are some of the key messages that MATRADE tries to convey to exporters? Can you share that with us?
Yeah. So this is critical, right? So you have this, as you said, on a sectoral basis, you have different messages coming up. One is overriding message is that you don't have a choice, right?
Yes.
That has to come in. Two is that you got to reframe it. It's not a cost, it's just investment.
Yes.
Three, this is not a challenge, it's an opportunity. Right. If you take a step back and think about it, right, let's move on from ESG and look at SDGs. There are 17 SDGs, there's about 169 targets. Every one of them could be seen as a problem statement, if you see it that way, or it could be seen as opportunities for us to create innovative products and services to address those problem statements. Because every country in the world, every organization is trying to address those climate change and so on and so forth, right? So if Malaysian exporters are able to see it along those lines, then suddenly this whole perspective of ESG and SDGs becomes something that is light at the end of the tunnel for them, right? So it's not something that you got to drag them to, but it's something that they will go willingly because, hang on, this is opportunity for me, right? So that will be some of the core messages that we like to convey.
It's like SWOT, right? You talk about strengths and weaknesses with opportunity and threats. Every opportunity can be a threat. Similarly, a threat can also be an opportunity. And it's just how we look at these challenges and strategize, as you mentioned, as part of this investment that we need to do in order for this long-term sustainability for us to be able to create this future for us, for our Malaysian exporters at the very least. Now, we'll take another short breather right now. When we come back, let's talk about the importance of storytelling as a catalyst to move that needle, Mr. Jai. We'll take another short breather right now. When we come back, we have more stories to share with you. Stay tuned. We're right back.
Yeah.
Okay. Ika, we can go on the next segment. Okay. Hello, thanks again for staying with us on The Nation. You're still with me, Elaine Noor Abdullah. We're speaking about sustainability in MATRADE, in specific the ESG, which is the environmental, social and governance. And with me and in conversation is Mr. Jai Shankar. He's the Director of Oil and Gas, Chemical Energy Section at MATRADE. Mr. Jai, we had quite a robust conversation earlier with regards to sustainability as a whole, ESG. The requirement for the private sector to jump on board is no longer should I, it's I need to be able to invest in this for us to be able to move forward together as a nation to make us competitive on a global platform. Now, we spoke about some of the challenges earlier and we talked about some key messages that helps reframe that thought process as well, which is key for people to be able to find that path, to find that direction. Now let's talk about storytelling. How important is storytelling as a catalyst to move this needle, Mr. Jai?
It is very, very important. And this is because the thing is this, a lot of SMEs sometimes feel that they need to do everything proper and only then they start start to leverage on the fact that they are ESG compliant. It's not the case. It need not be the case, right? A lot of times we realize that when we have discussions with exporters, they're already doing some things good and well, right? They might not even have a certificate to say so, but ESG is, broadly speaking, this broad-based approach, right? So, for example, let's take an exporter who just happened to be who hires single mothers. Now, that's the storyline. That's something that you can actually proudly talk about. But a lot of people it doesn't even resonate to them. They don't even think about it, right? But storytelling is good, because if you start having a conversation with a foreign buyer, and if your narrative is only limited to price, quality, it's all fine and good, but those are common denominators at this point in time. What you'll be able to tell is, hang on, you know what? I'm also employing some single mothers to do this product. That would also help the buyers to sort of, have an ESG compliant when you have the discussion with his buyers, so to speak, right? So there's a lot of stuff that we are doing, but we don't talk about it. In many cases, a lot of the larger companies are doing this very well. They might do one thing well, but they talk about it. And because they talk about it, they get a bit of mind share with the consumers, and that helps a lot. So one of the things that we sort of, try to educate the companies is that saying that, do look across what you have already done. And you have done certain things well. It could just be that you're sponsoring a football club in the kampong, right? In your factories there, and you've done that, right? And that's good enough for you to talk, because that's community engagement. But there's a caveat to that, right? There has to be a caveat to that. ESG is not CSR. CSR is a part of it, right? But so while that helps in terms of storytelling, it need not end at that, right? So all we're saying is that there's a building block, and learn to talk about it. For example, right? So if you open somebody's corporate website, an exporter's website, typically you have maybe a photo of the machinery or something of that sort, right? It would be nice to have a photo of your community where you're operating from. Right, and so on, right? So that's part of the storytelling, saying that, you're part of it. The plantation sector, for example, provides employment for a huge range of people from different segments of it, and they're usually in rural areas and so on and so forth, right? So those are all, I think, aspects that perhaps doesn't come across, and it's not sort of picked up by the by the consumers and so on, right? So if we do that well and continue to do on our ESG journey, it helps both ways, because one of the biggest challenges with this is that if they start committing on funds and work, and they don't see returns, and then they get a bit nervous and jittery and stuff like that, right? So what I'm saying that, hang on, you can already start talking about the little things, or maybe the big things. Maybe it's little to you, but it could be something substantive that you are already doing, right? So look deep into what you're doing and start working out the narrative.
So what can exporters do to address these challenges? How do they find these narratives? How do they seek and locate and understand how to be able to navigate and make the ESG part of their everyday process?
Okay, so that goes to the other challenge, right? In a lot of times, in SMEs especially, right, the MD is also the export manager. He's also the production manager, and he's also the supply chain manager, right? So you do have all in one. Yeah. So you do have a poverty of so-called skill sets, so to speak, right? And everything sort of onto that. So that is one of the things that maybe we need to have some level of training, so that somebody else sort of looks into it. But there has to be, I suppose, ultimately less complication, right? Because now when you talk about ESG, a lot of people shy away and think it's something that's too complicated. So if you can sort of, for a lack of better word, maybe you can sort of dumb it down a bit and say, look, it's not that complicated. It is essentially about protecting the planet, the people, and the right governance. Governance is a big component of it. Then you can basically start talking about it, right? So a bit of communication, and there are, by the way, some funds out there. MATRADE, for example, offers about 100,000 ringgit. If you're out there trying to get an ESG related certification, sustainability related certification, is a claimable grant. So you can basically leverage on such funding. The other thing I want to point out, Elaine, is that the importance of data. Data is very important. So if you're already automated, there are other initiatives. For example, MITI has moved forward and pushed for industry 4.0 sort of initiatives under the Industry Forward project, right? So there's a lot of movement that happened for Industry 4.0 prior to this. And that would also sort of form a bedrock for these companies to start talking about what they're doing and what they can do. Without the data framework in place, you would struggle to do ESG compliance because you don't have data traceability, you can't do reporting, you can't do analytics, and so on, right? So if you already have done certain things related to Industry 4.0, and you've got some level of data, you can leverage on it, right? So some aspects of training is important, some aspects of data is important, and then you can look at the basics. If you look at websites, for example, so the websites are way too product-driven for the time being. They're not talking a narrative. There are opportunities out there for you to talk about a lot more than just your product. As mentioned, price is given, quality is given if you're exporting. So what they're looking at is they're looking at the X factor. And the X factor, they can be the ESG factor.
What I think in summary, Mr. Jai, is that there must be commitment from all parties to take this on, that it is a necessity for us to be able to go on this path and go on this journey. And once we're committed to it, we'll find it necessary. Because it can get very overwhelming, as you mentioned, listening to this ESG, environmental, social governance, how do I do this, paperwork, data, documentation. It might seem overwhelming, certification, and you might not know what to do, but you must take that first step, and that first step is commitment. Thank you so much, Mr. Jai, for sharing that with us. And we hope that more SMEs and exporters come forth and understand the necessity for us to be ESG compliant in order for us to be able to be competitive on the global front. Thank you so much, Mr. Jai. We were speaking to Mr. Jai Shankar, Director of Oil and Gas, Chemical and Energy Section MATRADE, on the topic of environmental, social and governance in the export business. So from the perspective of international trade, the need for demonstrating sustainability has already become a requirement to be an effective player in the global supply chain. We will not only gain market access based on the compliance to sustainability, but we are also at risk of being excluded from certain markets if our exports fail to show compliance. So once again, thanks for joining me on The Nation. I'm Elaine Nobler. Bye for now.
Thank you, Elaine.